In this race, 2020, you realize in broad terms that what you wanted was not just popular, was more popular than anything else that was running. And yet, those things weren't things that could be put into your political space. You recognize that there's something wrong with that. And in doing so, many of these people went into the streets. Now, I would like to make the very basic point basic argument, that if we're having the conversation about cops, that your political instrument would say, let's talk specifically about cops. Now, I am making the point that the people who are out there, the thing that you want is not specifically to defund the cops. You want to have thriving communities where the cops are irrelevant. That doesn't get rid of everything. Don't misunderstand me. But if we're talking about a broad stroke from a statistical standpoint and something that will make your communities healthier and get rid of these issues that we're talking about here, this is what you're talking about. Let me make my point. Because your political instrument is only going to talk about one side of this equation, I want to talk about the other side of the equation. They want to only talk about cops. Oh, we're going to give them more kittens. We're going to have them deal with dogs in order to make their lives a little bit better, to make them more cuddlier. I don't want cuddlier cops. I don't want to interact with cops at all, unless it is vitally, vitally necessary. And even then, the device that's in place, I don't want that to be in this kind of strong man with gun coming to save the day. That is a failure of your society. Having 1,000 people die at the hands of cops, this is a national disgrace made more abominable by the fact that 99% are never charged. Let's talk about the other side of the equation. The analysis used census tracts to measure concentrations of people living below 125% of the federal poverty line. The area with the highest income, low level, had the highest rate of felony arrests. A very basic thing. I'm not going to be too in the weeds on it. Just very basic point. The areas with the highest poverty have the highest violence and the highest crime. This is not determinative. So it's not like every individual, but that's not what I'm looking for. I'm looking for a statistical analysis of how do you get rid of crime and how do you make people's lives better. And we could talk about what's left over and how to deal with that. But at the very least, let's get rid of the low-hanging fruit, especially if we're having this issue about African Americans. And it's like, let's talk about the black issue. All right, fair enough. I want to talk about it in terms of poverty. So right here. According to Becker's economic theory of crime, the relative benefits of committing a crime are greater in communities with greater income inequality. Well, no shit, Sherlock, right? If I have a house, a job, a decent job, I can buy the things that I need for the most part, I'm satisfied. The level of me getting something out of crime that is going to satisfy me any more than what I already am pales in comparison to what I can lose if my life is taken away when I run afoul of the law. Now, the catch here is in comparison to, that is doing a huge amount of work, because depending upon where you are on that income scale, that in comparison to changes, meaning I need to eat, so this becomes less of a, these are the things that is somewhat rational, where you can look at it and say, yeah, that makes sense. As a society, you look at this, yeah, that makes sense. I can agree with that. I don't know how anyone can disagree with that. All right. So then, oftentimes we hear about average income. Well, let's not talk about average for the moment. Right here. 18% of U.S. workers, 44% of U.S. workers earn $18,000 a year. 44%. Richest country on the planet, nearly half of your country is making $18,000 a year. Now, if you agree with me on the previous point, that in communities, in areas where there is a huge amount of crime, there are issues of poverty, then it's in the bricks. If you're walking around, and I didn't say shit about race, by the way. If you're walking around with nearly half of your workforce in poverty, then it is in the bricks. That crime, that angst, that thing that you're talking about dealing with. You need a strong man because you have basically allowed through policy choices poverty, deep, entrenched poverty. Now, you also have the last president admitting In that situation, giving 95% income to the top 1%. If you agree with me that allowing areas to fall into disrepute incentivizes and increases the likelihood of crime, because crime is incentivized because it benefits, then is not the issue getting rid of the need of the crime itself, or the areas where crime can flourish, as opposed to focusing entirely on the cops? Meaning, if you're focusing entirely on the cops, you miss the boat. But your political instrument is intentionally trying to miss the boat because they don't want to deal with the underlying issue. 90% of the elections are won by the side with the most cash. That means your political instrument, the moment that you removed any notion of accountability under this blue no matter who nonsense, flew as fast as it could to the right. You've bled off people who would typically vote Democrat because those people look at what you've done as so marginal. The reason that those people are legitimately angry and legitimately out in the streets, despite the fact that it may be supplanted into the issue of race, is really an issue of class, because those things are intrinsically linked. And just because the Democratic Party has been able to break that connection needs to be re-understood. The very conversation about Black lives is built into this notion of commerce. You were born here. The very fact that you are here is a testament to such. You cannot disassociate any notion of race with class. And I'm sorry, you cannot disassociate the notion of cops and making them more cuddlier without dealing with the income inequality. If you have a small section of the population that is filthy rich and another section that is dirt poor, what are the conditions do you think that are going to take place and fester into the one that's dirt poor in comparison to the one that's rich? I've been to Kenya and I've seen the shanty towns where the cops don't necessarily go in and they have this kind of criminal element that just flourishes because all incentives are for it to flourish. Your communities are no different, even though they may take on a lower level than that. What you would need to do at that point is, Jeff Bezos, people like him would say, we can either fix those communities by giving them cash and making sure that they are healthy and flourishing, or we could save money, pay cops, and I could become a trillionaire. That's the choice, consciously made by your political class, with all of these people doing performative measures to try to prevent dealing with that one basic point. The cops are there because they are intrinsically necessary if you don't want to deal with the income inequality in those communities. When confronted with a public that is up in arms and wants change, Joe Biden decides people are screaming, defund the cops. Joe Biden. That's why I'm proposing an addition to policing our country. Yes. With people saying defund the cops, Joe Biden's response to that is, that's his response. Fuck you. Defund the cops. Fuck you. Kick rocks. With, in small letters, you have nowhere else to go. That's what he's telling you. You have nowhere else to go. This is what they tell you for the past God knows how long. That's what Joe Biden is saying right here. Now, Simone Sanders comes out and is going to explain what needs to take place from the standpoint of this election and one Joe Biden. Now, you have all of these people in the street screaming, change. Yes, Black Lives Matter, change.
In the 2016 election, you were Bernie Sanders' press secretary. We remember it well. And just last month, one of Bernie's top aides warned that a significant portion of his supporters are currently unsupportive and unenthusiastic about Biden. This is a problem. As somebody who's worked for both men, okay, how do you get Bernie supporters on board with Joe Biden? How do you get them to understand the severity of the situation?
Well, look, Joy, I think it's really about our campaign ensuring and being vocal and speaking directly to supporters of Senator Sanders and other former candidates in this race, saying that this is a place for them. And that's exactly what Vice President Biden has done. He's been authentic, but our campaign has done outreach with what I like to call meticulous surgical precision to our progressive friends, to young voters across this country, through our efforts through our League 46 program, which is our...
Nothing. We have nothing to tell you. What you need to justify. Full stop. what you need to justify, what Joe Biden needs to justify, what Nancy Pelosi needs, what the Democratic Party, what your political device in full terms needs to justify is how the hell do you tell us that Donald Trump is the walking apocalypse while simultaneously saying you will veto Medicare for all, a policy that would organically bring people to your side? You have millions of people in the streets, not just in the streets here, but abroad. And your response to them is, yeah, Bernie Sanders voters, we've done outreach. No. What you need to get at is how do you justify that Donald Trump is the walking apocalypse? Donald Trump is going to destroy the world. Donald Trump is going to destroy democracy. Yet, I, Joe Biden, am not willing to accept a policy that would organically bring those supporters, Sanders supporters, to my side for us to win this thing. You need to justify that because those supporters has 88% support of Democrats, meaning you are on the wrong side of that issue, fundamentally so. Even from the standpoint of the arc of time, you realize that you are at an inflection point where the arc of history is regarding you. They're in the streets screaming, change. What do you want? Occupy Wall Street was there screaming for change, and they wanted somebody to be receptive to that. But instead of being receptive to that, you had the first black president that gave 95% of the income to the top 1%. And then kicked out this guy. This is the guy they kicked out. They didn't want this guy.
With a profound remark. 2 + 2 = 4. In other words, there is a logical and rational process called cause and effect. In terms of Newtonian physics, that means that every action causes an equal and opposite reaction. In other words, fellow members of the House, there are reasons why things happen, as controversial as that statement may be. A society which neglects, which oppresses, and which disdains a very significant part of its population, which leaves them hungry, impoverished, unemployed, uneducated, and utterly without hope, will, through cause and effect, create a population which is bitter, which is angry, which is violent, and a society which is crime-ridden. And that...
Right here. Right there. Logical as logical can be. Now, your political instrument only wants to focus on cops. I hate to tell you this, but cops will be cops because the incentive structure built into the policing model itself will have them to act that way. The authority in and of itself that you give them will have something in their head that maximum justice will happen. Whether it's 1,000 or whether it's 500, that is a moral stain. My point here is eliminate them, defund them, but defund them organically by dealing with, especially from the standpoint of a big issue. You had civil rights movement, you had workers' rights. It was very clear in what they wanted. I'm saying defund the police is too minor, it's too small, it's too insignificant for what all of this energy commiserates. And that in real world terms, what you're trying to get at when you're talking about defunding the police runs into the flat fact question of why are they there? And in that question, you get to poverty. And by the way, just so we're very clear, don't let them take this and bury it in the way that they want to do. They don't back you. They don't support you. Those Black Lives Matter people, even though they may call themselves Black Lives Matter, was actually trying to get to issues of poverty because they understood that those things were linked. Any speech that you hear from Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, any of those people back then, poverty was intrinsically linked to the argument. This has nothing to do with poverty. Again, they want to make it specific to cops. You can't make it specific to cops because the laws themselves are in the bricks. The entire point of the drug war, all of those people being criminalized, was being done so entirely for political gain. Did you think that the black president that was in office didn't know that? It didn't matter. Kept it on the books. Incrementalists. Despite the fact that, again, this was done explicitly in the bricks to lock up as many dark bodies as possible. I'm trying to make the point to you that your system is fundamentally flawed in a somewhat of a systemic way. And that if you really want to have this argument, this conversation, honestly, your movement is not there to make menial demands. Your movement is there to make bold, expansive demands about what your generation wants. What do your generation want? Do you want to persist with this idea that we accept a certain amount of chaos, of people living on the street, or crime, or people killing themselves, or for that matter, cops eating their guns for dealing with that, and we just persist as if that's okay? No, this is our moment. We make this argument now. That's the demand, and accept nothing less. Be maximalist in your cause. And I would argue this is not even a maximalist demand. My argument basically would be freedom, but nobody knows what that means. Any notion of freedom in this case, people think working 40 hours a week is. You spend the entirety of your day working and that's freedom? Fair enough. But let's talk about this in the context of poverty, something that we do understand since, again, 44% of the population is trying to eke out an existence on $18,000 a year. Deal with that. And we talk about the poverty that's left or the crime that's left after. Like, share, subscribe.